Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today we need to answer maybe the biggest question in the entire NHL right now. Will the Vancouver Canucks make the 2022 NHL playoffs? Now I know you might be thinking, the Canucks were outside of playoff race for a long time during this season, but they have reappeared and have won 6 straight games and are only 4 points outside of a playoff spot with 1 game in hand on the LA Kings. They're in a decent position to be able to get there and the momentum is on their side. But will the Canucks actually be able to reach a playoff spot? What has changed for this roster and what could happen if they make the playoffs this year? Watch till the end for all the analysis, all the predictions, and all the Canucks talk, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 50% of the people that are watching are not subscribed, so if you like hockey, this channel is the place to be. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you guys, I probably would not be making this video today if it weren't for the Canucks win last time around against the Stars. I think they won 5-2, but obviously since I watch a ton of Stars games, I was able to watch that game and tune in, and it was a pretty great performance for the Canucks winning in that one, and that was pretty much the biggest game of the season up to that point for Vancouver. They were still trying to scrape and claw their way into the playoff picture, but against a team that they're trying to win against and trying to get over in the standings, that's a humongous win for them, and it puts them in a much better position. Again, the Canucks have won 6 straight games, and in terms of actual playoff position, it's an interesting one because they're actually more likely to get the 3rd spot in the Pacific than they are to get a 2nd wildcard spot. When it comes to the playoffs and the LA Kings, they have 90 points in 77 games this year, but right now they have the 3rd spot in the Pacific. That spot is where Vegas was hopefully trying to go towards, but with 2 straight losses, they've been kind of in a funk, especially recently. But when it comes to the LA Kings, again, 90 points in 77 games, you also have the 2 wildcard teams in the Preds and the Stars right now who have 91 points in 76 games each. So it's more likely that the Canucks are able to get that LA Kings spot than they are to get the wildcard spots, but still, getting wins against a team like the Dallas Stars is humongous for them and puts them in a much better position. And then you got the other team fighting for the spot in the Pacific in the Vegas Golden Knights, who in 77 games have 87 points. Now, with that loss to the New Jersey Devils and the Canucks winning against the Stars, the Canucks have the better points percentage and right now are a lot more likely to make the playoffs. They have the 6-game winning streak, they have all the momentum on their side, and right now, for Vegas, it's not looking good whatsoever. Now, we would not be talking about the Canucks right now if it weren't for the points that they got versus the Vegas Golden Knights over the last 2 weeks. When I tell you that the Canucks have been pretty clutch recently, I'm not lying. 7 games ago, the game that happened right before their current winning streak, they played the Vegas Golden Knights and did lose in overtime, but they did get a point. And then the next game they played versus Vegas, they won 5-1 and blew out the Golden Knights, and that game would start their current 6-game winning streak. They also would play the Golden Knights a couple games later where they went to overtime and won 5-4. For one, the offense has been fantastic over this winning streak. I mean, they scored 5 goals or more 5 different times out of these last 6 games. They've been truly brilliant offensively, and I feel like when it comes to consistency, when it comes to the clutchness of this Canucks team, I feel like that's what puts it over the top for me, especially comparing them to the Vegas Golden Knights. I mean, with Vegas, those were games they truly needed to win, not just to get the Canucks out of the conversation, but to keep themselves in the conversation. And now they've let themselves be beaten by the Canucks 2 straight times, and now the Canucks are better in terms of point percentage. They have way more momentum. They've been way more consistent recently, and in my opinion, if I'm choosing either team to make the playoffs, I think Vancouver is way more likely at this point, especially with how clutch they've been, and I think that will honestly continue for them. Now, when I tell you the Canucks have been amazing offensively, I am not lying to you, and I think this is a big reason why we could see the Canucks get really close or even make the playoffs this year over this 6-game winning streak. I want you to guess, how many goals have the Canucks scored over 6 games? Maybe like 20, 22. That's a pretty solid rate. That's a pretty decent rate. The Canucks have scored 32 goals over these last 6 games. I mean, 7 versus the Coyotes, 2 different times they've scored 5 against the Golden Knights, 6 goals against the Dallas Stars. They have been offensively a juggernaut over these last few games. Obviously, you have the mainstays like JT Miller being fantastic, but Elias Pettersson has been on fire over these last 2 weeks. Vasili Podkolzin has been great over the past 5 games. You got also Conor Garland, who has 6 6 points in his last 5 games. A ton of different guys are coming together to truly maximize the offensive potential of this team, and they're playing the Ottawa Senators next, so I don't really see the offense for this team stopping anytime soon. But let's talk about that schedule for the Canucks for a second, because this might be the most interesting and probably important part left for the Canucks in these last few games. They got 6 games to go, and overall their opponents aren't too bad, but aren't too fantastic either. They next up play the Ottawa Senators, then they play the Wild and the Flames 2 straight times, then they go on to the Kraken, then the LA Kings on the 28th, which will easily be the most important game there, and then the Edmonton Oilers in their last game on a back-to-back. Now, personally, looking at this schedule, I think they win against the Ottawa Senators. I think they get 1 point each out of the Wild and the Flames. Then they win against the Kraken, so that puts them up to a total of 6 points. Then they play the LA Kings. I think they win that game too, putting them to 8 points over these next 6 games. And then they play the Edmonton Oilers. I'm going to say they also win that game. Maybe the Oilers are resting some players in the final game or something. So that puts them up to 10 points over these last 6 games, which would put them to 96 points on the year and put them in a pretty solid place to be able to get the playoffs. But the problem becomes for the LA Kings, they have 90 points right now and 5 games to go. There's still a decent chance the LA Kings win almost all the remaining games they have, even if they lose against the Canucks, and the Canucks still aren't able to get there. In terms of actual strength of schedule, Tankathon puts the Canucks at 17th best, which means that they're on the lower side, they're on the lower tier of teams that have a harder opposition. First is the hardest, and then last is the easiest. The problem becomes for the Vancouver Canucks, the team they are trying to compete really now against the most, the LA Kings. In terms of strength of schedule, they have the second easiest in the entire NHL. Right now, they have 5 teams that they're playing, or 4 teams they're playing against that are non-playoff teams. You have the Kraken, you have the Blackhawks, you have the Ducks 2 different times, and then the Vancouver Canucks, who are still outside of the playoff spots. So when it comes to the LA Kings, you have some games there that are pretty likely wins. You probably win against the Kraken, you might win against the Blackhawks, you probably win against the Anaheim Ducks. That's really the biggest problem for this Canucks team, but even with the LA Kings, they're a team that's been all over the place over this last month, so there is still a chance for them to get there, even if the Kings have the much easier schedule. Now, here's the thing for the LA Kings side of things. With them having 90 points, let's say the Canucks get 96 points by the end of the season, and they win against the LA Kings, and that contributes to the total. All the LA Kings need to do is get 7 points in their last 5 games. They probably win against the Kraken, they probably win against the Blackhawks, they at least, I think, win one against the Anaheim Ducks, but let's just say they lose one against the Ducks, and they lose one against the Canucks. Even if that happens, they'd still be at 96 points on the year and would be tied with Vancouver. I'm not exactly sure which one would get the upper hand in the playoff spot there, but there's a pretty big chance that it all comes down to that last game, or that second to last game for the Canucks versus the LA Kings. If they aren't able to win that game, then it's all over. I mean, they obviously want to win as many games as possible over these next 6 games, but that LA Kings game will determine everything for this Canucks team going forward, and they also gotta really hope that teams like Chicago and Anaheim play massive spoiler, because at this point, every single point matters for Vancouver. I mean, I would not doubt Bruce Boudreau's ability to make the NHL playoffs. If he misses the playoffs, it'll be the first time, I think, in his entire career that his team will miss the playoffs. And so far, it's looking good. And for Vancouver, they're coming together right at the perfect time and have pulled themselves out from the depths of the playoff race to put them right in the forefront. And honestly, although I want the Stars to make it, if the Canucks do get that 3rd spot, I would not be too mad, because that is an amazing story and would be a great series versus the Edmonton Oilers too. But honestly, at this point, I am fully on the Vancouver Canucks bandwagon. I fully hope that they are able to make the playoffs this year and get that last spot in the Pacific, because in my opinion, they're a team that, with the momentum they have, could do something in the playoffs. Versus Edmonton, it'll be a really interesting one, since the Oilers also haven't had many playoff successes over the past few years. But at the same time, it could be a very close series that Edmonton likely wins, but with the Vancouver Canucks momentum, with the goaltending they have, who knows what can happen. Stranger things have happened than the Canucks potentially winning a series this year. And to me, in my opinion, looking at the strength of the schedule, looking at everything we see here, although the most likely thing that happens is probably them tying the LA Kings in the standings. If they're able to get past the LA Kings, maybe one of those games versus the Wild or the Flames, that would be huge for them, and making the playoffs in this wacky year after they fired their coach way too late would be insane. And personally, right now, the Canucks are in a very solid spot to do it. I think right now, as it stands, the Vancouver Canucks will make the playoffs and will be able to get there. Again, going back to the last few games, those wins versus Vegas were huge. This last win versus Dallas was the biggest one of the year. And now looking ahead, I think this team is able to get those clutch wins and get them consistently. And that, in my opinion, will put them over the top. But let me know in the comments down below, what do you guys think about this Vancouver Canucks team? Do you think they make the playoffs? Do you think they miss the playoffs? Which teams do you see making it in the Western Conference? Do you see the LA Kings making it instead of the Canucks, the Golden Knights maybe getting back in the conversation truly? Do you see the Stars and the Preds still being the wild card teams? Let me know all your thoughts down below. And again, let me know your answer to the biggest question here. Will the Canucks make the playoffs this season? Make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, hit that notification bell if you haven't already. Again, comment down below all your thoughts. Share this video with your friends. Get the Canucks bandwagon out there because I guess it is rolling. And make sure you drink some water today and click on this card for all my hockey rankings content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a fantastic day and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.